This is actually the first song that Jimmy and I really work on from scratch.
Well, she's walking through the clouds.
It was a situation where it didn't matter what we did. If I twiddled a couple of knobs and made something sound weird, and it was thought, wow, that's cool, let's do that. Because there were no rules.
Eddie Kramer has seen it all. From the late-night madness of Jimi Hendrix's sessions to the raw intensity of Led Zeppelin's early recordings, he has worked with musicians who defined rock music.
Here comes Dolly.
His ability to capture groundbreaking performances is undeniable, but the process wasn't always easy. Some artists brought chaos into the studio, whether through substance abuse, perfectionism, or sheer ego. Kramer has rarely spoken outright negatively about those he's worked with, but when asked about difficult sessions, his answers paint a picture of both frustration and admiration. He wasn't just an engineer, he was often a mediator, a psychologist, and at times, the only person keeping a session from completely derailing. Ace Frehley stands out as one of the most unpredictable musicians Kramer ever had to manage. As the lead guitarist of Kiss, Frehley was known for his wild personality, a trait that only worsened with alcohol and drugs.
Ace is late. Ace Frehley, I love him dearly. So Ace walks in, and I swear to God, this guy was so thin, if you turned him sideways, he would disappear, you know. Wow. And he plugs in, and it's like, fuck, this is the guy. I mean, he was the heart and soul of Kiss, I think, certainly from a guitar playing point of view.
By the time Kramer produced Frehley's 1978 solo album, the guitarist's behavior was at its most erratic. Ace was an incredible player, no doubt about it, but you never knew which version of him was going to show up, Kramer admitted. Some days Frehley would arrive in the studio in top form, delivering the kind of raw melodic solos that made him a rock icon. Other times, he'd be too intoxicated to play, forcing Kramer to either wait or find ways to salvage what he could. Working with Kiss as a whole was no easier. Kramer had been involved with the band on multiple projects, including Love Gun and Alive 2, two of their most successful records.
And I see Gene and Paul walking up and down the hallway and doing their thing. And they had a record that they did called Wicked Lester. But it was freaking terrible. I mean, they were trying to sound like the Beatles. It was freaking horrible.
And that was kind of their goal, though, to be the Beatles of the heavy world, right?
It went out and straight in the bloody toilet.
The sessions were far from smooth, largely because of the power struggles within the band. Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons ran the show, often sidelining Frehley and drummer Peter Criss. There were always these little battles happening in the background, Kramer recalled. Frehley and Criss were treated as secondary members, despite their significant contributions. That tension spilled into the recording process, where decisions were often dictated by Stanley and Simmons rather than what was best for the music. It was frustrating because you had all this talent in one room, but egos kept getting in the way. Led Zeppelin presented a different kind of challenge. Unlike Kiss, there was no doubt about who controlled the band, Jimmy Page.
Jimmy's the director. He had all the ideas and all the stuff about how he thought it could sound. But then once the two of us got in the studio, it was a very creative conglomeration of two guys working together at the console, and very exciting to work with him.
On the second album, we go in to record at Olympic in Barnes. First album's done at Olympic, but we go in there. There's a different engineer. We haven't got Glyn Johns there.
Kramer engineered Led Zeppelin II, an album that helped solidify the group's status as one of the greatest rock acts of all time. However, the way it was recorded made it one of the most difficult projects Kramer had ever been involved with. Zeppelin was constantly on tour, which meant sessions were squeezed into whatever studio was available at the time. We were piecing the album together in different places, in between shows, trying to make it all work.
I had other things. I had Ramble On, but we weren't to record those until we were in America.
Page was the driving force behind the band's sound, and his perfectionism could make the process painstakingly slow. Jimmy was meticulous. Every note, every tone, it all had to be exactly how he imagined it. While that level of dedication contributed to Zeppelin's legendary status, it also meant long hours in the studio, with Kramer having to adjust to Page's endless tweaking. Tensions occasionally flared when Page felt his vision wasn't being realized. He had a very specific way he wanted things to sound, and if it wasn't right, we'd do it again and again. Kramer respected Page's work ethic, but the constant adjustments could be exhausting. Cactus never achieved the commercial success of Zeppelin or Hendrix, but their sessions were just as wild, if not more so. The band, featuring Carmine apiece, Tim Bogert, Jim McCarty, and Rusty Day, had all the elements of a great blues rock act, but their lack of discipline made recording with them an ordeal. They had a great energy, but they were all over the place, Kramer recalled. Where Zeppelin had Page as a taskmaster, Cactus had no one keeping things in line. Sessions often turned into parties, with more drinking than recording getting done. There were days when we'd get 1 or 2 usable takes, and that was considered a good day. While the band had moments of brilliance, their inability to focus in the studio kept them from reaching their full potential. The Rolling Stones thrived on chaos, but that same unpredictability made their recording sessions difficult. Kramer worked with the band on Beggar's Banquet and Let It Bleed, 2 albums that helped define their late 60s sound. Keith Richards, in particular, was notorious for his unconventional working habits. Keith was brilliant, but he wasn't someone who followed the usual structure of a session. He would often show up at odd hours, expecting everyone to be ready whenever inspiration struck. That spontaneity contributed to some of the band's best moments, but it also made it hard to maintain any sense of order. Brian Jones was another challenge. By the time Kramer worked with the Stones, Jones was in steep decline. His drug use had made him unreliable, and his contributions to the band were diminishing. Brian was barely there, physically and mentally, Kramer admitted. There was an unspoken understanding in the studio that Jones was on his way out. You could feel the shift happening, and it created this weird atmosphere.
I always felt very sorry for Brian. Fame doesn't sit very comfortably on anyone's shoulders. But some people's shoulders doesn't seem to sit on at all, and he was one of them, and I don't think it suited him.
The Stones had always been a band fueled by internal tension, but during that period, the fractures were becoming too deep to ignore. Even Jimi Hendrix, despite his close working relationship with Kramer, could be difficult.
He was sitting on the couch behind me and he fell on the floor and was writhing around on the floor, gripping his head in his hands, going, oh my God, whoa, what's that? That's the sound I heard in my dream. He was freaking out. He was losing his mind.
Hendrix was constantly pushing himself and those around him to go beyond what had been done before. That meant endless experimentation, sometimes at the cost of efficiency. Jimmy would want to try everything, different amps, different mics, layering 10, 15 guitar tracks just to see what worked.
There are just too many choices and you'd have to figure, all right, that really does not work over there, and we got to be selective. Many layers of guitars. Here's one layer. And here's the next layer of overdubs. Now, mind you, this is only 2 guitars. You can really hear how complicated it is.
It was a dream for any producer looking to break new ground, but it also meant sessions could stretch on for hours, sometimes days. Hendrix was also a perfectionist when it came to his own playing. He'd nail a solo, but he'd want to do it again, searching for something just out of reach. Kramer understood Hendrix's mindset, but occasionally had to convince him to move on. There were times when I'd say, Jimmy, we've got it, this is the one, but he'd still want another take. The constant pursuit of something greater was part of what made Hendrix a genius, but it also made the process exhausting. Kramer's career has been defined by his ability to navigate difficult personalities without letting the work suffer. Whether dealing with Frehley's unreliability, Page's obsessive attention to detail, or Richard's unpredictable schedule, he found a way to make it work. His patience and technical expertise kept these sessions from falling apart, and in the end, the music spoke for itself. At the time, you don't always realize you're making history. You're just trying to get through the session, get the best performance you can. It's only later that you look back and see what you were part of. Kramer didn't just record great music, he survived the personalities behind it.